Greetings and welcome to this week's episode of Free to Learn, a weekly production brought to you by the Zimbabwe National Students Union ZINASU and the Danish Students Federation DSF. I'm your host Karen Manzera, standing in for Liam Takura Kaninga, and this week we are discussing the issue of compulsory vaccination on campuses. And to discuss this, I am joined by Munashe O'Brien Gutu, who is the Secretary General of the Zimbabwe National Students Union, Harare Province. O'Brien, welcome.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Karen.
So let's get right into this. What's the situation like at different campuses around Zimbabwe in terms of compulsory vaccination?
Well, compulsory vaccination has been introduced in quite a number of institutions within Harare Province and within Zimbabwe as a whole. And it's characterized by a cohesive approach to the vaccination perspective. That is to say, institutions are actually encouraging in a persuasive manner students to get vaccinated, such that at some point in time you would actually be refrained from entering into the school premises. For example, at Harare Poly, students were not allowed to enter into the school premises without a vaccination card or a PCR test, which is 48 hours fresh. So these are the issues that are ongoing, as well as at the Harare Institution of Technology, whereby students at some point were actually barred from participating in their examination due to the fact that they would not have gotten a jab. So these are the issues that are actually taking shape in our institutions of higher learning.
So you are saying that students are being deprived of their right to education because they are not vaccinated. So on constitutional grounds, are these institutions right, or are they suppressing students' right?
Well, the question of vaccination is quite a sensitive issue because we are having a situation whereby the government is trying to make sure that the nation gets back to normalcy through achieving herd immunity. So it actually uses its agencies, for example, institutions of higher learning, for example, institutions of state enterprises, compelling the employees as well as the students to get vaccinated. So it's a situation whereby the government is trying to make sure that people get vaccinated. But at the end of the day, you will notice that the manner with which they are implementing the whole vaccination process is quite persuasive. They are using undue influence and duress, which is contrary to the constitutional provision. While we have to appreciate the fact that human rights, they are limited.
They're not absolute.
They are not absolute. But we have to also take into cognizance the fact that there is a certain limitation that is allowed by a law. That is for the purposes of public safety and public interest. But when you do the limitation, you have to make sure that you don't do it in an arbitrary manner, in a manner that tends to violate the human rights of students. So with institutions, we are realizing that what they are applying is a forced kind of approach, which is contrary to Section 52 of the Constitution, which only limits the right to security, to personal security, only on the grounds of public safety and public interest. And as well, it's instructive of the fact that the government should make sure that whenever it wants to implement anything that infringes the rights of any individual in Zimbabwe, it does so after making sure that they draw informed consent. So I have to highlight informed consent, and we've realized that there's no informed consent.
So you're highlighting that, the manner in which the government and the various institutions in the country are forcing students to get vaccinated is the one which is wrong. But in actual fact, having as many people being vaccinated would help our nature, our nation rather, to move back to normalcy. So what do you think, what measures should be put in place maybe to make sure that students can make an informed decision to go and get vaccinated without being coerced?
Well, fine. From the inception of the vaccination program, you notice that the government was on track record mentioning that it's not compulsory, it's not mandatory, it's just based on voluntary basis. But we've realized that in practice, that is not what is obtaining on the ground. So what the government needs to do is to first keep suspicion amongst the students, was whenever it applies a forced approach to the vaccination question, because it's a sensitive issue, people tend to be suspicious, and students tend to be more suspicious because they feel that perhaps there might be an agenda that the government is trying to push. and it's something that is being shared in the social media grounds, in the various public domains and so forth. So those are the issues that the government need to look into, to say if we are to vaccinate as many students as possible, students should be informed, students should question the whole process, students should be availed with information from the World Health Organization to say these are the pros and cons of vaccination, and not to couch it in a manner as if it's a system which is not foolproof, which is just perfect. Yet we know it's a scientific process which might have its own negatives.
Yes. True that. So you're saying that government really needs to do a wide information dissemination around the issue of vaccination. A lot of misconceptions have been coming in from street talk, from social media around this issue of vaccination. And I guess that is the reason why people then became reluctant or had suspicions around the vaccination. So, O'Brien, when the vaccination program was rolled out, I remember preference was given to the frontliners, to journalists, and then to civil servants, and so on and so on. But was there ever a time that a batch was said this one is for the students, or preference was given to the students, because the government knew that they were planning to open universities, they were planning to open institutions, and people were going to gather. So was there ever a time when preference was given to the students?
Well, there was never a time when students were given first preference or any preference for them to get jabbed. But what the government basically did was to say, we've reached such a point in time whereby we've managed to acquire as many vaccination dosages as possible. And now the members of the public, including those people who had not acquired the first preference or the preference threshold, would actually come and get their jabs. And that's when there was a purported or an assumption that the students as well are among the criteria of people who are now able to access their vaccination, their vaccination dosages.
So with, the students are more like the intellectuals, the think tanks of the country.
Yes.
And with the students being reluctant or not making the decision to go and get vaccinated, yet the country is trying to put efforts to reach herd immunity. What does it imply for the nation, and what message do you have to the students in terms of going and getting vaccinated?
Well, what is happening on the ground is that the students, they are not reluctant per se, but they are questioning the method that is being used. Like what I've pointed out, to say, if you compel someone to do something, it raises a lot of suspicion. They would ask why. So those are the issues that the students would be raising eyebrows for, to say, why are we being forced? Why aren't we being informed? Why aren't we being set down and information being displayed for the purposes of making sure that students understand and appreciate more the vaccine question? If I'm to be honest with the truth, students can actually do some positive to make sure that information is disseminated within the members of the general public, because there is an element of the students being barometers of class consciousness. So we have to make sure that if the students first do not really appreciate the whole information displacement mechanism that is being applied, what of a person who is out there who has not had the privilege to get to learn or to get to interact with some other people who are studying, for example, who are at the faculty of College of Health Sciences, who might have knowledge of the whole scientific connotations that underlie this particular question.
And speaking of the students' efforts in this, what is the union doing in terms of encouraging students to go and get vaccinated?
Well, the union has been doing quite a lot of programs to make sure that they exhort students to go and get vaccinated. That is, they've been conducting a lot of researches and displaying some documents that are being downloaded on the WHO sites, and displaying them to students who cannot even access information. For example, I can put the example an example of the University of Zimbabwe, whereby we held a discursive program to say, no, guys, what's about the vaccination? Why aren't we going to get the jab? What are the issues? What are the underlying issues? And that's when we got to understand that there's a question of suspicion, and also the phobia of getting jabbed as well. It's also something that should be taken into cognizance. So we were actually sharing information and also utilizing some of the students who are into biochemistry, medicine, and so forth, so that they can get us into perspective. But some of the students might be laymen. For example, me, while I'm studying law, I might not be knowledgeable of scientific issues, and if I try to expurgate into those kinds of issues, I would be trying to act like I'm a priest, a false priest. So we managed to gather those people, knowledgeable people, so that they can dispense information. We also did Manicaland as well, also held a program. You can also take into cognizance Bulawayo province. They also did under ZINASU programs to make sure that students can interact and get more information on the vaccination question. But in strict sense, what is happening basically is that students are still suspicious of the whole process, but still medical facilities such as CIMAS, which is contracted with the University of Zimbabwe, is also providing students online mechanisms to update them on where to get the jab and what kind of jab, whether it's the first dose or the second dose. So to some extent, they're actually trying to ameliorate the situation on the ground from an efficiency and convenience perspective, and it's a plus.
So O'Brien, you are saying it's all coming back to the issue of the manner in which the students are being coerced to go and get vaccinated. So what measures or what ways do you think the government and the various institutions of higher learning should use in terms of informing the students to go and get vaccinated?
Well, fine. On that, institutions of higher learning have to take a proactive stance in ensuring that information dissemination is guaranteed. It also is to respect the fact that this fundamental human right, the right to personal security, is only limited to an extent of public health and public safety. That doctrine of proportionality provides that whenever there's a limitation to a right, it should be done in a democratic manner, which is based on openness and respect for fundamental human rights. What it basically means and entails is that the limitation should be acceptable in a democratic society. So if the limitation is acceptable, it has to meet certain criteria, and the criteria is provided for on section 52 of the Constitution. That is to say, informed consent. That is why I had to emphasize the fact that informed consent is associated with, firstly, information and consent. So we cannot, information and consent are intrinsically intertwined. That is to say, we cannot be able to come up with a consent which is not information driven. So again, the right to access to information also comes into play. So the government has to take that proactive role. Of course, it is doing it to a certain extent through music and so forth, but it needs to get into the students' ground, into those institutions, dispensing information, pamphlets, as well as ensuring that even on the online websites of the university, there's a portal for COVID-19 that showers information on COVID-19 alone.
And the vaccination program as well. Yeah, true that. And I feel like it's more important for the government to disseminate information because, you know, like you said, people who are not even in the medical fraternity are disseminating information around the vaccination program. A lot of misconceptions are there and a lot of myths are there, and that is why students are generally, you know, not up for getting jabbed. So as we wind up, what recommendations do you have, you know, to the students in terms of the vaccination program?
Well, the students basically have to take a proactive stand towards acquiring information, because there are some instances whereby you cannot wait for the government to do that for you, in as much as it carries a constitutional mandate.
True that.
Because we are in a situation of a crisis whereby there is urgent need to return back to normalcy, because even remote learning, online learning is not perfect, because it is too privileged. So some students are actually disadvantaged because of the remote learning. So we really need to get back to normalcy. So students should also take a proactive stance in acquiring information through doing researches, also for the benefit of the communities to which they come from. So that is on the students to make sure. And I also have to call upon students associations to also take a proactive stance to make sure that students get the jab if they feel like they need to get a jab. Yes.
So, according to Monashia O'Brien Gutu, there's an urgent need to return back to normalcy, and students should therefore take a proactive approach to the vaccination program in terms of seeking information as well as researching and disseminating information around the vaccination program. From myself, Karen Manzera, and the crew behind the scenes, it's goodbye for now.